The phone buzzed against the nightstand at 7:52 in the morning, and I almost didn't hear it over the hum of the hotel's air conditioning. I was still in my wedding dress. Not the whole thing. I'd kicked off the shoes somewhere around midnight and unzipped the back myself in the elevator, because Tyler had been too busy laughing with his groomsmen to notice I needed help. But the dress itself, the ivory lace, the boning that had left red marks across my ribs, all of it was still on me, twisted around my legs like I'd fallen asleep mid-collapse. Which I had. Tyler was beside me, one arm thrown over his face, snoring lightly, still smelling like the Hendrix and the cedar aftershave I'd given him as a wedding gift because his sister told me he'd mentioned liking it once. The room at the Fairmont overlooking Lake Ontario was filled with that particular golden light you only get in late June, and there were rose petals from the centerpiece crushed into the duvet, and my feet ached in a way that felt earned, almost sacred. I remember lying there for a second before I reached for the phone, just looking at the ceiling, thinking, this is it. This is the part of my life where everything finally clicks into place. Then I looked at the screen. Lakeshore Family Health, private clinic. It was a Sunday morning, the day after our wedding. What clinic calls on a Sunday? I almost let it ring out. I really did. My thumb hovered over the red icon for what felt like a full 10 seconds. But something, I genuinely could not tell you what, some animal instinct that hadn't gotten the wedding day memo, made me slide out from under the duvet as quietly as I could, grab the white hotel robe off the chair, and slip into the marble bathroom before I answered. Hello? Good morning. Is this Olivia Bramwell? A man's voice. Calm in that specific, over-rehearsed way that immediately makes the back of your neck go cold. It's Olivia Mackenzie now, actually, I said, and even in that moment I remember smiling a little when I said it, because the name was 4 hours old and I hadn't gotten tired of it yet. We just got married last night. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that costs something. Congratulations, the man said, and I could hear him deciding how to continue. Mrs. Mackenzie, Ms. Bramwell, I'm Dr. Okonkwo-Reyes. I'm one of the physicians here at Lakeshore. I need you to come into the clinic today, if you're able. Today? Is everything okay? There's something in your results we need to discuss with you directly. In person. Another pause, longer this time, and then his voice dropped, just slightly, just enough that I noticed. I'd ask that you come alone, and I'd ask that, for now, you not mention this call to your husband. I stood there in that bathroom in my wedding dress with mascara smudged down to my cheekbones and my hair half collapsed out of its updo, staring at myself in a mirror trimmed in brushed gold, and I felt the floor of my life tilt about 4 degrees. Not enough to fall, just enough that you notice gravity is no longer where you left it. I'll be there by 10, I said. I need to back up, though, because none of that makes sense without you understanding who Tyler was to me and who I thought we were together. Because I genuinely believed, with the kind of certainty you only get to have once or twice in a life, that we were the couple who'd made it. I grew up in Oakville, the kind of town where the lawns are cut on a schedule nobody wrote down but everyone follows, where half the dads coach hockey and the other half wish they did. My parents divorced when I was 11, badly, expensively, with lawyers and a custody calendar color-coded on the fridge. And I think that did something permanent to the way I evaluate relationships. I don't fall in love easily. I interview people, basically, for the first 6 months, even when I'm trying not to. I met Tyler Mackenzie at a conference in Toronto 2.5 years ago. I was working in marketing for a mid-sized fintech company near King and Bay. He was in commercial real estate, and we ended up at the same table during a panel on client retention strategies that neither of us cared about. He made a joke about the panelists' PowerPoint font choices that made me laugh so hard I had to leave the room, and he followed me out into the hallway just to see if I was okay. And that was it. Really. That was the whole thing. 2.5 years compressed into one hallway. He was 33, easy with money but not flashy about it, the kind of guy who tipped well at the diner, but never made a show of it. He drove a perfectly reasonable Honda CR-V. He called his mother every Sunday without being reminded. He remembered that I liked my coffee with oat milk specifically, not almond, and he never once got it wrong in 2.5 years. He opened doors, but not in a performative way, more like a habit so old he didn't notice he was doing it. We got engaged in October, on a hike up near Collingwood, the leaves doing that full orange and red thing that makes Ontario genuinely beautiful for about 9 days a year, and we set the wedding for the following June. I planned almost the whole thing myself. My mother offered to help, and then mostly just texted me Pinterest boards from her phone. And I loved every stressful, expensive minute of it. We did the math together more than once, sitting at our kitchen table with a shared Google sheet, dividing costs the way 2 reasonable adults with healthy credit scores do. Mine was $812. I remember that specifically because Tyler used to tease me about it, call me Im's perfect credit like it was an inside joke between us, which I suppose it was. We did the responsible thing too, the thing my mother always told me to do and never did herself. A few months before the wedding, we both went in together for a full panel of STI testing, the way you're supposed to when you're about to make vows about forsaking all others. We went to the clinic holding hands. We made a joke about it in the waiting room, something about how this was the least romantic pre-wedding ritual imaginable. Right up there with the dress fitting where the seamstress pins you into submission. The results came back clean. We laughed about that too, relieved in a way that felt almost silly, given how little either of us had actually worried. So when the clinic called the morning after our wedding, my first thought wasn't fear. It was confusion. We'd already done this. We were cleared months ago. What could possibly be left to discuss? I drove to Lakeshore Family Health, still half in my dress, because I hadn't thought to pack a change of clothes for an emergency clinic visit on the morning after my wedding. Who would? And I sat in the waiting room in ivory lace while a woman beside me filled out intake forms for what was presumably a far more ordinary Sunday. Dr. Okonkwo Reyes called me back within 15 minutes. He was younger than his voice on the phone, maybe 40, with kind eyes and the specific posture of a person about to deliver news he'd rather not be the one delivering. "Thank you for coming in," he said, and then he opened a folder on his desk, angled so I could see it, though none of the numbers meant anything to me yet. "I want to start by saying this isn't about your results. Your results are completely clean, exactly as they were the first time you tested." "Okay," I said slowly. "Then I don't understand. It's about your husband's sample." He paused, choosing words the way you choose a path through a minefield. "As part of our quality protocol, we run periodic DNA verification on a percentage of submitted specimens, cross-referenced against patient ID at intake. It's not standard, but we started it after an incident a few years ago. Your husband's sample from the testing 3 months ago was flagged in that audit. The DNA profile doesn't match the DNA profile on his health records from his GP, which we have on file from a referral 2 years ago." I sat very still. "What does that mean?" I said. It wasn't really a question. I think I already knew, in the animal part of my brain, even before the words finished forming. "It means," Dr. Okonkwo Reyes said gently, "that the man who came in under your husband's name and identification was not, biologically, your husband." I'd like to tell you I had some dignified reaction, that I asked sharp, intelligent follow-up questions, that I stayed composed. What actually happened is that I laughed. One short, ugly bark of a laugh, because it was so absurd, because I had been married for 14 hours and someone was telling me, in a clinic with gray carpet and a motivational poster about hand washing, that my husband had sent an imposter to take a medical test in his place. "Are you certain?" I finally said. "We reran it twice before I called you. I wouldn't have made this call otherwise." "Why didn't you call him?" "We did, actually, before we called you. Standard protocol when there's a discrepancy involving a named patient." He hesitated. He didn't answer. We left a message asking him to call back. "I made the decision to also reach you directly, given the timing and the nature of the discrepancy, because it has direct implications for your own health and your own informed consent, and that supersedes a lot of our usual protocol. I hope you understand why." I did understand, actually, in a cold, clinical way, that I wouldn't fully feel the weight of until later that night. The man I married 14 hours ago had been so afraid of what a real test might reveal about him that he had arranged for someone else to take it in his place, and had then let me stand at an altar at the old mill and promise myself to him in front of 110 people, including my mother, who cried through the entire ceremony because she said it was the happiest she'd seen me since I was a kid. I drove home from the clinic with the windows down, even though it was barely 14 degrees out, because I needed the cold air on my face to think. Tyler was awake when I got back to the hotel room, sitting up against the headboard, scrolling through wedding photos people had already posted, grinning at his phone like a man with nothing on his conscience. "Hey, where'd you go?" I woke up and panicked for a second. He laughed. "Thought you'd come to your senses." "Just needed some air," I said. Wedding hangover. I want to be honest with you about something. I didn't confront him that morning. I know how that sounds. I know there's a version of this story where I march back into that hotel room still in my dress and demand answers. And maybe a braver woman does that, but I am not built that way. And I've made peace with that about myself. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with before I said a single word, because the man I'd married was, it turned out, extremely good at lying convincingly to my face, and I did not trust myself to read him accurately in the moment. I needed evidence. I needed to not be the only person who knew what I knew. So I smiled. I let him order room service. I let him tell me, over eggs Benedict and orange juice, how beautiful I'd looked the day before, how his uncle had cried during the speeches, how he couldn't wait for the honeymoon in Tofino the following month. And I sat there in my wedding dress, fork in hand, performing the single best acting job of my entire life, while internally I was already making a list. The first call I made, 2 days later, was to my closest friend, Sasha Okafor. Sasha and I had been friends since university at McMaster, and she is, among other things, the most level-headed person I know, a litigation paralegal who has heard every excuse a person can give for breaking trust and has stopped being surprised by any of them. "I need you to not react," I told her over the phone, "and then I need you to help me figure out what to do." She didn't react. She listened to the whole thing, the call, the appointment, the DNA mismatch, without a single interruption, and then she said very calmly, "Okay. First thing, we don't do anything emotional. Second thing, I know someone." The someone was a private investigator named Denise Marlowe, a former Peel Regional Police officer who now ran a small, discreet firm out of Mississauga, doing the kind of work that mostly involves sitting in parked cars outside other people's lives. Sasha had used her once for a workplace fraud case at the firm she worked for. Denise's retainer was $1,400, which felt like an enormous amount of money for a woman who'd been married for 2 days. But I paid it without blinking, because I had an 812 credit score and a healthy emergency fund, precisely because I'd never once let myself depend financially on someone I hadn't fully verified, and apparently some part of me had known that instinct would matter someday. Denise came back to me 9 days later. 9 days during which I went to work, cooked dinner for two, slept beside my husband, and said I love you, Ty, every single morning like a woman who was not quietly building a case file against him in a folder on her work laptop labeled, with a kind of bleak humor I'm not proud of, Q3 vendor review. She came back with photographs, with location data pulled from a shared family plan loophole. I won't get into, and with a name. Brielle Fontaine, 28. A property stager Tyler had met through work, living in a condo near Liberty Village. They'd been involved, according to Denise's timeline, for 16 months. 16 months. Our engagement had been 14. I sat at my kitchen table with that math in front of me and felt something in my chest go very quiet and very still, the way a room goes quiet right before a storm actually arrives. It clicked into place with a horrible kind of clarity after that. Tyler had been afraid that a genuine STI test 3 months before our wedding might come back with something he couldn't explain, something that would force a conversation he had no intention of ever having. So he'd called in his oldest friend, a guy named Curtis Whaley, who he'd known since high school in Burlington, the kind of loyal, slightly hapless friend who would do almost anything if you framed it as a favor and didn't ask too many follow-up questions. Curtis had gone in under Tyler's name, with Tyler's health card, and taken the test in his place. Clean results, no awkward conversation. Wedding proceeds exactly as planned, with me standing at that altar, having no idea that I had just promised myself to a man who'd gambled my physical health on a lie because he was more afraid of being caught than he was concerned about protecting me. That was the part I kept circling back to, more than the affair itself. Not the cheating. God knows enough people cheat, and it's awful, and it breaks something, but it's a familiar kind of awful. This was different. This was a man who had looked at the possibility of putting me at risk and chosen his own comfort anyway, deliberately, with planning, with a phone call to a friend asking for a favor. I called Sasha. I called my mother, which was the hardest call because she genuinely loved Tyler. She used to send him recipes, for heaven's sake, and I had to listen to her voice crack on the phone in a way I hadn't heard since the divorce. Then I called a family lawyer Sasha's firm worked with regularly, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Naomi Picard, who specialized in exactly this kind of situation and had, it turned out, seen far stranger things than mine in 20 years of practice in Ontario family law. Given the timeline, Naomi told me on our first call, and given the fraud involved in obtaining your consent to marry, which, to be clear, is what this is, fraud, we have a real path to annulment rather than divorce. It's cleaner, it's faster. It protects you better, especially financially, since the marriage barely exists in legal time yet. I chose a Saturday, our 1-month anniversary, as it happened, though I'm fairly sure Tyler had forgotten that detail entirely. He'd made a reservation at the same Italian place on King Street West where we'd had our second date, the kind of small, warm, candlelit spot with handwritten specials on a chalkboard, and I let him keep the reservation. I let him drive us there in the CRV. I let him order the wine, a Niagara Cabernet Franc. He was proud of himself for picking. I waited until the breadbasket came. "I need to tell you something," I said. He looked up, that easy smile he'd worn the whole night, flickering slightly when he saw my face. "Liv, you okay?" "I went back to Lakeshore," I said. "The clinic, the morning after the wedding, they called me." I watched his face very closely, the way you watch a horizon for the first sign of weather. "Did you know they do random DNA verification on submitted samples now? Cross-referenced against your GP file." The color started leaving his face before I even finished the sentence. "Your sample didn't match, Tyler. The man who came in under your name 3 months ago wasn't you. It was Curtis." The bread sat between us, untouched, The restaurant was warm and full around us, a couple at the next table, laughing about something, completely unaware that 4 feet away a marriage was ending in real time. Tyler's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. I can live. I can explain. I also know about Brielle Fontaine, I said. My voice was steady, almost unnervingly so, even to me. 16 months. The condo on East Liberty Street. I have photographs, Tyler. I have location data. I have everything. He opened his mouth and closed it twice before anything came out. He looked, for the first time in 2.5 years, like a man who'd run out of exits and was only now realizing the room he'd walked into had none to begin with. I need you to actually hear what I'm saying, I continued, and I had rehearsed this. God, I'd rehearsed it, in the shower, in my car at red lights, lying awake at 3 a.m. beside a man I no longer trusted. You didn't just cheat on me. You sent your best friend to take a medical test in your place because you were afraid of what it would show. You let me stand up at the old mill in front of 110 people, including my mother, and make promises to you, and you knew the entire time exactly what you'd done, Olivia. His voice cracked on my full name the way it almost never did. He reached across the table, and I moved my hands into my lap, out of reach. Don't, I said quietly, without any heat behind it. Just a fact, stated plainly. My lawyer's name is Naomi Picard. She'll be reaching out to whoever you retain this week. The marriage is 31 days old. There isn't much to untangle financially. We kept things mostly separate, thank God, but I have it all documented, and if you make this difficult in any way, I will not be quiet about why it ended. He said, I love you. He said it the way a drowning man reaches for anything within arm's length, not because it'll hold his weight, but because it's there. I know you think you do, I said. But you love your own comfort more. You proved that pretty thoroughly. I put my napkin on the table, picked up my coat and my purse, and walked out. Sasha was parked half a block down on King, hazards on, engine running, exactly where she'd told me she'd be 2 hours earlier when we'd mapped this whole evening out like a small military operation. I got into the passenger seat and she didn't say anything at all. Just handed me a Tim Hortons coffee that had probably gone lukewarm waiting for me and pulled out into traffic. I watched the lights of the city smear past the window and let myself cry for exactly 15 minutes, because I'd decided in advance that 15 minutes was all I was giving that night. And somehow, I kept the promise to myself. The annulment came through 4.5 months later on grounds of fraud, and Naomi Picard was, true to her reputation, extraordinary about the whole thing. Because the marriage was so legally young, and Tyler didn't contest it. I think he was too ashamed and too aware of what I could make public if pushed. The process was cleaner and faster than anyone had warned me to expect. I got my name back, Olivia Bramwell, all the way through, on my driver's license, my health card, my mortgage pre-approval letter that I'd started looking into on my own, just for myself, before any of this ever happened. Curtis called me once, about 3 weeks after that dinner. He was crying, genuinely, in a way I don't think he could have faked. He said he hadn't known about Brielle, that Tyler had told him the test was just a formality before the wedding, and that he himself was squeamish about needles, and didn't want to make a fuss about it, that he'd had no idea what he was actually covering up. I believed maybe 60% of that. I told him I didn't blame him for being a loyal friend, exactly. But that loyalty, given to the wrong person at the wrong moment, still has consequences you have to live with regardless of your intentions. He said he knew. I wished him well, and I haven't spoken to him since. Tyler and Brielle stayed together for about 8 months after everything came apart. From what Sasha heard secondhand through a mutual contact in the real estate world. Somebody saw them at the St. Lawrence market once, and then nobody saw them anywhere, and eventually, the way these things always do, the story just went quiet. I went and got my own full panel done again, a real one this time, with my own family doctor, who was kind and unhurried about the whole thing in a way I needed more than I expected to. It came back completely clean. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot afterward and cried again. But this time it was different. Uncomplicated, pure relief, the kind that empties you out instead of filling you up with dread. I moved into a one-bedroom in Leslieville that fall, a different neighborhood entirely, with exposed brick and a kitchen island Tyler would have hated because he always said islands ate the room. I bought a couch I'd had my eye on for almost 2 years and never let myself buy because he thought it was an unnecessary expense. It cost $1,800, which felt genuinely indulgent, and it remains the single most comfortable object I have ever owned in my life. I joined a Tuesday night pottery class at a studio near Queen Street, mostly to have somewhere to be that had nothing to do with him. I started cooking again on Sunday afternoons, FaceTiming my mother while I did, and she stopped crying about Tyler somewhere around the 6-week mark and started saying things instead like, "You know, I always thought it was strange he never let you see his phone notifications." I'm not going to tell you I came out the other side of all this completely fine, because I didn't. Not for a long while. I spent months second-guessing my own judgment, lying awake doing forensic replays of 2.5 years, hunting for the moment I should have caught it. The thing about a person who's genuinely good at lying is that they're good at it. There's no smoking gun moment you somehow missed, no obvious red flag you were too in love to notice. Sometimes a person is simply deceptive at a level you weren't braced for, and the only real choice you get is what you do once you find out. What I decided, eventually, sitting on that $1,900 couch on a Tuesday night with wet clay still under my fingernails, was this. I wasn't going to let one man's fear become the headline of my entire life. I'd built things from scratch before. I could do it again, and probably build them better the second time, because I'd know exactly what to watch for. My credit score, last I checked, sits at 829. My RRSP contributions are higher than they've ever been because I stopped splitting every decision with someone else's risk tolerance. I still have Sasha, who has never once said, "I told you so," even though she'd be entirely entitled to. I still get pho on Thursdays from the place near my old apartment, even though it's a 20-minute drive now, because some habits are worth the commute. And sometimes, when the light in my new apartment goes that particular gold color in the late afternoon, and my impossibly comfortable couch is exactly where I left it, and I am precisely, deliberately, nowhere I didn't choose to be, I think about that Sunday morning. The mascara under my eyes, the wedding dress, the marble bathroom at the Fairmont, the phone ringing on a day it had no business ringing. And I think about how close I came to never finding out at all. Some things that feel like an ending are really just the ground clearing itself, so something honest can finally grow there.